Our environmental activists are suing the Minerals Resources and Energy Minister and the National Energy Regulator of South Africa. This over plans to allow the construction of new coal-fired power stations or power plants. Gabriel Klaasen from African Climate Alliance joins us now to unpack this. Gabriel, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, do you believe that this goes against our constitution? And if so, why?
Firstly, thank you so much for having me. And secondly, yes, I do believe it goes against our constitution. It's one of the main bases of this case is that we are supposed to, according to Section 24 of our constitution, have the right to a healthy environment and well-being. And yet the new procurement or the want for new coal-fired power is exactly the opposite of that, because we understand the effects that has not only on the environment, but more importantly, on the individuals living not only in frontline communities, but those living in South Africa in general, as well as for future generations to come. To its core, the new coal-fired power is not needed. We can, and we've seen that renewables and alternatives are far less cheap, far less expensive, and actually more affordable, and will actually give a better turnout compared to that of coal. And so I do think it's not constitutional, but actually it's not smart to want new coal when we could be looking at harnessing the renewable energy that we could have potential for in South Africa.
Now, Gabriel, Minister Mantashe says South Africa must manage its transition away from coal-fired power generation systematically and not rush a switch to renewable energy sources, because if we take a look at what's happening in China, for example, despite a push to limit coal production and to meet climate change targets, China now is ramping up coal imports as it faces an electricity shortage. Now, surely we don't want this to happen here in South Africa, especially seeing that we are already dealing with an electricity crisis. Don't you agree with that?
Either we don't necessarily want the continuation of these blackouts, rollout, load reductions, and then load shedding. I think every South African, especially if you live in a community where you can't afford to have your own solar power generation on your roof or a generator, it's not necessarily the smart thing to do. And that's why I do sympathize and understand the argument for us to take this slower and steady. And that's what a just transition is to its core. It's a slow transition, but we need to make it fast as well. But it's a transition that is equitable from the monopolized fossil fuel industry that we currently have toward a more renewable, socially owned energy. And to its core, that's what we believe in. We don't believe that overnight we want to switch over from coal and go forward. We need to ensure that the jobs are secured of the individuals working right now. We need to ensure that we make our efforts going forward. South Africa is actually one of the, at COP26 was one of the countries that, one of the developing countries that the world was looking at as a model for a just transition, because we are at such a point where we are one of the biggest contributors in the world when it comes to fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions. But we are at the same time in a place where we've got this great capacity and opportunity while we're developing to move towards renewables. And so, of course, I don't want us to continue these load reductions, load blackouts, and load shedding, but we do have to think smart about how we are going to build ourselves forward and grow as a country toward this future that we think and we believe we deserve.
Now let's talk about developed nations versus developing nations, and you did touch on that just now when you mentioned it. The big concern here is, of course, the South African economy. Like we said, we can't rush into things. So what would you say then should the minister and the government do to then tackle this issue?
So the way I like looking at things is understanding firstly, and I think many of South Africans understand this, is that nothing happens in silos, and so we can't act as though we can address them in silos. And so it's not a social issue, it's not an environmental issue, an economic issue, it's in fact a system issue. And within that, everything is addressed. And so at the economic point, I think what we're seeing is the DMRE was unwillingness to kind of even hear out the opportunity for for renewables and alternatives for us to move forward. That's why on the 22nd of September, across our nation, people were calling to hashtag uproot the DMRE, because we understand that they are the biggest barriers to our just transition and our green future. The economic aspect is one of the most important when it comes to the way we move forward in this country, because as you know, more than 70% of our youth are unemployed. Our communities are still suffering 27 years after negotiations. And, you know, every time an election comes up, local, national, what have you, there's always a promise for something to change, but that never happens. And so a massive aspect of that is to realize that with renewable energy, with alternatives, with this transition that is supposed to be an equitable one, not an equal one, we can have a future where green jobs are prioritized, where our system is reinvigorated. Right now, we're looking at coal as a reinvigoration, but what we actually are seeing is that continued use of coal is going to come to an end, because coal isn't infinite, but we can find alternatives and different ways forward.
All right, so now I have to lastly just ask you very quickly this last question. Any feedback there from Nersa and Minister Matashe on the matter? Did you get any response from them? And do you have a court date?
So that's two very important questions. I'll try to keep it very brief. So African Climate Alliance, Vukani Environmental Justice Movement in Action, and Groundwork, who are the applicants represented by Centre for Environmental Rights, have issued the documents and are now waiting for the 7th and the 6th and the 7th of December, respectively, for the two individuals, Nersa and the Minister, to give forward any documents that we've requested and that they should be giving forward. As you know, our court system in South Africa is a bit backed up, but we do hope that we do get a court date soon and that we are heard with hope. So no court date as of yet, but the campaign stays strong as we move forward.
All right, thank you so much. That was Gabriel Klaasen from African Climate Alliance here on eNCA. It's the South African Morning.